In place of human teeth, fangs that are not typical for humans began to emerge. A transformation took place. Barbara did not understand why he became like this. It was all good before, but why did he suddenly turn into a monster? There were so many different necks in this world. Thin, strong, old, young. But if only Barbara could put collars on those necks and make them obey her. She was very curious about what would happen then and what it would be like. Barbara was a young, sexy founder of a jewelry company, only 27 years old, and she had already achieved such success. While passing by a well-known establishment, young men attacked the girl to tell her that they had a new, handsome man. Barbara only coldly replied that she was sorry, insistently asking him to go through. The young men were still confident in their beauty. They were interested in the girl not passing by, but now she had no time for that. It seems this girl was a frequent guest at a place called Chance, and was always greeted by the same #1 hostess named Brandon. Chance was a women's place where you could have a drink and chat with the hostess. Brandon was happy that the lady decided to come to him on a weekday. He asked if she was really not busy with work at the company today. Barbara only came because she needed to complain that her blind date had gone badly again. Brandon even stood up in surprise. The guy was sure that everything was prepared well for this date. The problem was that the other side said that Barbara was treating him like a dog. The guy was furious that the girl couldn't flirt or say anything nice. He believed that a woman who didn't clearly understand her place and at the same time went on a blind date would die alone. After these words, he turned around and left, without giving Barbara any chance to explain her behavior. The girl was in despair from not understanding what place this man was talking about and why she had already been dumped several times after several dates. Brandon didn't understand why Miss had to go on blind dates. Was it really that bad to love freely? Barbara didn't have the opportunity to fall in love freely, and she came to Chance in order to learn how to communicate with men. The hostess simply didn't know about her family's situation. This girl needed to find someone similar to herself so that she could work with peace of mind. Handing her a glass of wine, Brandon asked if she would be truly happy if she found such a person. It didn't matter to Barbara. Anyway, she had never loved anyone, even as a child. The girl was on the verge of hysteria. She began to think that something was wrong with her. Perhaps she had some kind of psychological illness, because of which she was not attracted to men. After thinking for a moment, Brandon promised to help her no matter what. Hearing these words, Barbara asked the guy to extend his hand to her. After he did so, she grabbed it, hurting him. Absolutely calmly, Brandon asked the miss if she had any sadistic tendencies, since she often did little pranks, although in fact it did not hurt him, but even a little pleased. Realizing she had just done something stupid, Barbara apologized, saying that this kind of thing was best done with mutual consent, asking him to tell her if he was uncomfortable. Extending his hand and leaning towards the girl, Brandon said that it was their duty to make the guests happy, so if it helped her relax, then she could continue. One of the customers noticed the hostess and called him over, attracting him by the fact that she had ordered an expensive drink for him. In addition to the hourly rate, when clients choose a hostess to chat with, they can also order drinks for them. The more expensive the drink, the higher the hostess's share of the income. Brandon apologized for having to move to another table. Barbara didn't care. She just asked him to order her a bottle of wine. If different guests choose the same guy, he will have to go around several tables to chat with everyone who chose him. Watching this picture from the side, Barbara did not understand whether flirtatious women were so lucky, because even relationships bought with money were the same. Even if she knew the rules, she still felt envy, because she also did not feel disgusted by such behavior of women. Lost in her problems and her inner pain, Barbara didn't notice how she got drunk. Somehow she still made it to bed, but she didn't care how it happened. All the girl wanted was to drink. She was unable to move, and the person who brought her immediately made sure there was water near Barbara. Brandon carried the girl to the bed. He handed her a glass of water, trying to calm her down, saying that she had just had too much to drink and was now in a regular hotel, and that he would leave here as soon as possible. Hearing that the guy was about to leave, Barbara grabbed him by the shoulder, asking him not to leave, thereby splashing a glass of water on both of them. The hostess apologized, saying that today was a special day and he needed to leave. Barbara didn't understand what special day he was talking about. She had heard that only women had special days. Did men have them too? The girl started to act up when she was drunk. She grabbed Brandon, not letting him leave, repeating how warm he was. It made her feel good. The guy grabbed his head, Things were bad. This was all starting to get out of control. It was becoming dangerous if he didn't leave right now. Brandon took off his shirt, seeing his bare torso. Barbara wondered how it was possible to be so hot. She really had no experience with the opposite sex. Even if she flirted, she still couldn't keep a person. She excitedly screamed at how cute his ears were. Brandon was surprised to hear this. Could it be that the transformation had started prematurely? The guy started shouting that a person can't have animal ears, and that she was imagining it all because of the alcohol. But the girl didn't give up. She stretched out her hands to touch and check if she was really imagining it all. Trying to resist, Brandon didn't notice how he touched Barbara's leg, and she stumbled, flying onto the bed. Without realizing how it happened, the guy ended up on top of her, and the girl noticed his eyes. They looked like the eyes of a wild animal. A cracking sound began to be heard throughout the room. Brandon felt very sorry, but he could not stand it any longer, begging not to look at him. Barbara stood up, as if she had sobered up in a second, not understanding what was happening now. The man she saw a minute ago turned into an animal. Barbara began waving her hand at him to see if he was still in his right mind, or like a beast. The transformation ended, and Brandon froze, not understanding why the girl was still looking at him. Barbara was now trying to figure it all out when the animal began to use a human voice to ask her not to call the police, assuring her that he would not harm her. With a smile on her face, the girl assured that everything was fine, and she was calm, thinking that they could communicate. Barbara was not just calm, she was in complete ecstasy, reaching out her hands to Brandon. She asked if he was as soft as he seemed, or if she was wrong. The animal froze in complete bewilderment. When Barbara was a child, she often had difficulty breathing at home, so she enjoyed climbing over the high wall of the shelter nearby, because there, behind the wall, a dirty little puppy was waiting for her. Each time she ran to him as fast as she could, hugging this furry creature tightly. Still, in this situation, Barbara didn't understand why Mr. Brandon had become so fluffy. Was he really as soft as he seemed? The animal tried to convince the girl that he was not fluffy at all, and that she was just sleeping, and when she woke up tomorrow, everything would return to normal. Brandon thought this reaction was very strange. In his understanding, a woman who saw a monster would want to run away. But was it really all because she was drunk? Barbara exhaled. It was no surprise to her that she saw a puppy in her dream, although in fact, it was a wolf in front of her. Suddenly, the girl knocked the animal down and found herself on top. She said that since it was a dream, she could do whatever she wanted. This was definitely a turn of events that Brandon didn't expect. She gently took him by the ear, saying that she had long wanted to look at them up close. The wolf did not want the girl to touch him, since the newly transformed body was very sensitive. Opening his mouth, Barbara asked if she could look at his mouth, but without waiting for an answer, she immediately began to examine everything. Brandon did not dare to use force. The beast's body had poor control over its power. If the wolf resisted, it could harm her, which is why he calmly endured everything she did to him. The girl gently stroked the animal's nose. It was so cute. Kissing his wet nose tenderly, she asked herself if a dog was really better than a man. Suddenly, Brandon shut Barbara up, asking her not to kiss him anymore, adding that things like kissing should only be done with someone you love. The animal felt that it was not worthy of this. Waking up completely sober in the morning, Barbara realized that she didn't remember anything else after the kiss. She began to remember how she had gotten drunk at the hostess bar the night before, and then been escorted out by Mr. Brandon. Moments of looking at the wolf's mouth began to emerge in her memory. Barbara tried to come to her senses, convincing herself that these were just hallucinations. After all, a person cannot become an animal. Indeed, she attached no small importance to this occasion. She decided to see Mr. Brandon first, and then gather evidence, so she called Chance that morning to make an appointment with the hostess. She was informed on the phone that Mr. Brandon was on vacation from today and could not receive guests. Since Barbara had never been to the establishment on weekdays before, she asked when the guy usually went to work. She was informed that the situation with this guy was special. Usually his vacation lasts for 2 days. Therefore, he would be there the day after tomorrow. Brandon was in incredible pain and difficulty. He was turning back into a human. This process was simply hellish. Friday, 7 o'clock in the evening, the mother tried to find out from Barbara why she again broke off relations with a potential groom. She believed that he was the ideal match for her daughter. The girl tried to explain that it was not she who was unhappy, but the other side that had abandoned her. The mother was still sure that the problem was her daughter, since she did not take the initiative, did not ask how he was doing every day. Barbara did get up early every day to say hello and reply to all his chat messages, but this potential suitor thought she was being cold. The mother believed that her daughter did not know how to communicate and would be the one who would die of boredom, because in a few years she would be 30 and her expiration date would expire, as a result of which she would remain an old maid. The secretary and Barbara's best friend knocked on the door of the office. She came to inform that the working day was already over and suggested that they go for a drink. From the girl's behavior, her friend realized that she was talking to her manipulative mother again. After finishing the phone call, Barbara said that she had something she wanted to know more about lately, so she would not drink tonight and would leave first. The guys at Chance's noticed Brandon, and they started discussing how they hadn't seen him in the last few days because the guy had a flexible work schedule. The other hostesses envied him, as he was a favorite of many. They even tried to reproach the guy for sitting too far from the guests, which indicated his unprofessionalism. Many of the clients liked the cold guy like Brandon, but one of the new guys still didn't understand why this was happening, because women come here to be treated like dear people. The new guy thought that Brandon was pretending to be cold while doing his job of courting people, like a whore pretending to be innocent, but he didn't have time to finish his thoughts. Brandon appeared out of nowhere. Completely ignoring the situation and his colleagues' excuses, the guy asked if he could borrow some perfume since they had just run out. The guy handed Brandon the perfume, asking if he understood correctly that Miss Barbara had arrived. The hostess explained to his interlocutor that it was the young rich woman who made Brandon number one in their establishment. Rumor had it that the guy had a very hard time when he first came to this establishment, and if he had not met a sponsor, he would not have been able to climb so quickly. So, even if he is indifferent to everything, he prepares himself the most every time he receives Barbara. Brandon was born with a body that was not like a normal person's. He could not be considered human. He couldn't pass a medical examination to go to school or get a stable job. No medical equipment could recognize the boy's blood. That's why, 3 months ago, Brandon was able to get a job only in this establishment. At first, the guy gave in to beatings from his colleagues, even though they knew that he didn't say a word. But he had the ability to seduce women. Brandon had no choice but to endure this attitude towards himself, because if he responded to them, he would not be able to control himself. This fight was interrupted by a girl who, by lucky chance, wandered into the wrong place. One of the guys started explaining to her that the restroom was in the next corridor, and this was the staff break room. Pointing her finger at Brandon, Barbara told him to walk her to the restroom. It was the very day they first met. Thoughts from the past were interrupted by a voice that informed Brandon that his guest Barbara had arrived. The guy was very surprised that this girl dared to come after she saw with her own eyes how he turned into a beast. The girl greeted Mr. Fluffy Ears from afar. Brandon repeated to the girl again that everything she saw was a dream. The guy invited Barbara to sit down, but she suggested finding a more secluded place, adding that what she wanted to talk about today wouldn't be good if someone else heard. Brandon brought the girl to a private room, offering her a drink. It seemed to him that she did not believe at all that it was a dream, and her attitude towards him seemed no different from usual. Barbara knew that drinking would ruin their evening, so she ordered a glass of orange juice and something to eat. There was nothing to eat on the menu, only alcohol, but the girl wanted to eat since she came to this establishment straight after work. Unexpectedly, Barbara changed the subject and admitted that she was afraid that Brandon would suddenly disappear. The guy promised that he would not disappear, adding that apart from this establishment, there was no place where people like him could work. Looking at him with eyes full of pity, Barbara asked if he really didn't have enough money. It could be called that. Brandon wanted to earn enough for early retirement. After these words, the girl laughed, asking how old he was. Avoiding answering her question, the guy warned her not to drink that cold orange juice, as if she didn't eat it, she would feel sick to her stomach. Brandon handed Barbara a box of sandwiches, suggesting that she eat them first. The girl was extremely surprised, since this dish was not on the menu. The guy admitted that he cooked them for dinner, but she should eat quickly, since the booth, although far away and not attracting attention, still has concerns. After taking a bite, Barbara asked if Mr. Brandon was so kind to all his guests. He laughed it off, saying it was just professionalism, noting that the girl looked a little upset. After eating and drinking some juice, Barbara began to feel much better. Having collected her thoughts, she finally decided to offer Mr. Brandon a deal. She used to think it was easier. She thought that the more she interacted with men, the sooner she would learn to communicate with men. But apparently, love is not so easy. So if Brandon needed money, and she needed a guy who could shut her family up, then everyone could get what they wanted. The hostess asked if he understood correctly that Barbara wanted him to pretend to be her boyfriend. Everything was exactly like that. The girl believed that it was very easy for a professional, because love can be shown to anyone and at any time. Brandon decided to ask why him. Was she really not afraid of him? Barbara laughed, saying it was probably because she liked fluffy things, and she already had evidence against him. Gently taking the guy by the hand, she assured him that if the contract was concluded, she would not say anything about the beast, thinking that if he did not agree, she would have to go to all lengths and beg for it. One of the arguments was that in this case, Mr. Brandon could not hide his transformation from Barbara. Biting his hand, she said that whether he would agree or not depended entirely on him. If he is not interested in such a proposal, the girl promised not to bother him anymore. Brandon asked if he understood correctly that if he refused, Miss Barbara would not come to this establishment again. She had no intention of imposing herself on him. Leaving her number, the girl said that if he wanted to sign a contract, he could contact her at any time. The guy responded sharply that he would not need to contact her. Barbara knew perfectly well that he was number one in this establishment, and the hourly rate was very high, even if he really had to find another hostess bar. Brandon meant that he didn't need to contact her since he was going to sign the contract right now. Taking the girl by the hand, he repeated once again that he did not need to think about anything and that he would sign the documents right now. After some time, they moved to a hotel to sign the contract. Barbara could not understand why Brandon agreed so quickly. It seemed the guy really needed money. After signing, she learned that he was 24 years old and that a generation gap had been avoided. The girl had no problem deciding to pay him by the hour. All Brandon had to do was come to her house after work and treat her like his girlfriend, try to bring her into an atmosphere of love. The guy could visit her in the morning, since Chance's establishment usually works from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until midnight. Barbara had to go to work during the day and had free time only in the evening. Apparently, the only suitable time is a day off for both parties. The girl suggested meeting in the morning on her day off, and in the evening, Brandon would go to work as usual, and then he would wait for her on his day off and have dinner together in the evening. The guy interrupted her monologue to remind her that he only had to take days off on the days of his transformation. It seems that Barbara is truly obsessed with the idea of learning how to be with a man. 3 months ago, at their first meeting, the girl asked Brandon that if you give money to hostesses, they won't get rid of the client. This question seemed strange to him even then. Their establishment's policy was that once you entered, they treated their clients like princesses and would never get rid of them. Changing the subject, he said that in a few minutes, a suitable hostess would be ready for Barbara. The girl didn't need another. She wanted to see Brandon. The guy froze at these words. It was a surprise for him. This guy was convinced that girls should give preference to strong and bright men who look like princes. But he was wrong. Carefully running her fingers over his cut, Barbara said that there were women who preferred to see guys in pain, crying, or completely broken. Barbara was one such woman. Turning into a monster was no problem at all for her. She didn't explain before that she wasn't a normal person either. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call her a pervert, so maybe monsters would be preferable to humans. In other words, Barbara liked monsters. After all, ever since she was a child, she had always been interested in only that dog. Brandon interrupted her, saying that she couldn't make such reckless promises about such things. Taking him by the cheekbones, the girl said that if he believed that it was because of alcohol that night, then she could not be considered credible, suggesting that the guy transform right now and see if she would be afraid. Brandon wanted to say that until the time came, he could not transform, but the guy began to lose control. This was impossible, since he had just rested, but for some reason, he could not control his body again. After apologizing, the guy said that he needed to leave urgently. His head was splitting like hell. Barbara grabbed his hand, asking if he was really going to break the contract with her, but Brandon pushed her hand away, trying to make it clear that he had no time for that now. The guy fell to the floor, and tentacles grew in place of his legs. Seeing Barbara heading towards him, he shouted at her not to come near. For some reason, the changes suddenly started again, his form not being aware of any rules, turning into a monster. although he retained most of his consciousness. Still, Brandon had inherited some of the monster's habits, so it was all extremely dangerous. The guy shouted at Barbara to leave quickly. He had never had such a form before, and he could not fully adapt to it. The girl tried to assure him that it was okay, and that she would keep a safe distance. She really wanted to help him, although she was a little upset to learn that Brandon was turning into more than just a dog. The guy started screaming that he didn't need help. Of course, he was divided into several parts, and it was extremely difficult to control them. First of all, Barbara had to protect herself. It was too late. Of course, her legs had already grabbed him. He couldn't control them, and didn't know what to do so as not to hurt her. Carefully taking the tentacles, the girl said that they did not seem hostile to her, and there was no need to worry. They seemed to enjoy being petted. Brandon asked her to keep her guard up, though, as he couldn't feel all the nerve endings yet, and they were moving in a weird way. Barbara had promised to stay away if she felt any danger, but now it seemed to her that even if she mocked them, they would still be obedient. Even though she was wrapped around him, she still dared to come closer. Brandon thought she was incredibly brave, but the girl didn't see anything dangerous in the pieces of meat. She asked how his body was, if it still hurt. This question surprised the guy, or rather the fact that Barbara knew about his pain. The guy no longer felt pain. The bones were no longer compressed. It seemed that only the lower part of the body had changed. Fortunately, not the whole body was covered with tentacles. Brandon said that under normal conditions, the rotation lasts at least 12 hours. But today, the rotation was quite sudden, so he didn't know how long it would last. He asked Barbara to go home and rest. The girl wasn't going to go anywhere. This was a great opportunity to prove that even if Mr. Brandon was in circulation, they could still date. In addition, she needed to learn to care for others. Barbara began a story about how she used to work even when her potential fiancé was sick, but then she abruptly stopped, asking him to drop the subject. In short, the couple had to take care of each other. But if one side invested too much and the other too little, the goal of the training would not be achieved. The girl turned around to go renew her room rental, but the tentacles pulled her in the opposite direction. Seeing her piercing gaze, Brandon asked her not to look at him like that. He couldn't do anything about it now. In that case, Barbara decided to negotiate with the tentacles, telling them that if they let her go, they could then wrap her around however they wanted. After the promise he made, the tentacles immediately released the girl. She was so happy, as if there were puppies in front of her. Brandon couldn't understand what was going on. His body, which was usually restless for a long time, suddenly became so obedient. Looking closely at the tentacles, he wondered if it was really possible to communicate with them. He tried, but it didn't work. It was all useless. His thoughts were interrupted by Barbara, who had arranged to extend the lease for another day. And if Brandon did not recover, she was prepared to stay with him longer. Since she still had work to do, she decided to go to bed early today. The guy froze in surprise that the girl was also going to stay here. But when she began to brush her teeth, he realized that she was determined. In fact, it would have been nice to rent another room, but since she had promised the tentacles, Barbara could not break her promise. In any case, there is a clause in the contract that completely stops the action X, and the violator is fined a tidy sum. Barbara fell asleep very quickly from fatigue. Brandon kept his eyes on her and thought about how the girl hadn't even been prevented from falling asleep by the fact that she was still entangled in tentacles. She really hasn't changed at all since 18 years ago. One day, waking up from a daytime nap, the dog discovered that there was more of a person. Trying to wake up the girl, he simultaneously asked why she came to this zone. Was she really a new experimental material? Barbara was 8 years old at the time, and when she woke up, she did not understand what material was being discussed. Still quite sleepy, she said that she simply climbed over the wall and ended up here. The animal did not understand how it was possible to climb over this super high wall, while Barbara froze in surprise. A talking dog stood in front of her. The animal immediately fell silent, realizing that he could not let ordinary people understand that he was extraordinary. When the dog pretended nothing had happened and simply started barking, the girl told it that such a show performance would not cause it to lose its memory. The animal realized that it had lost and suggested that Barbara leave this place as soon as possible. The research institute did not allow outsiders to enter or exit. It was very dangerous if the girl was caught. After these words, she was extremely surprised, since the sign outside said that this was an institute for the protection of children. Barbara approached the dog. She was not going to leave. The animal moved away from her, trying to explain that inside the walls there were monsters who needed injections and medicine every day. And he was a monster too. The dog decided that he had to scare the girl away, otherwise she would be examined like him, so he bared his teeth and threatened to eat her right now. Even this situation did not frighten Barbara. She carefully took the animal by the pads of its paws. Suddenly, she turned her over so that the dog fell to the ground and howled in pain. Leaning over this cute creature, the girl told him to calm down. Holding out her hand, she added that Barbara was very strong. No monster would eat her, so the dog didn't need to worry about her harming her. Even though the girl lost her memory and became a complete stranger, she was never afraid of Brandon because of this mutation. However, now he has lost the right to be with her again. Waking up in the morning, not in her home bed, the girl spent some time trying to figure out where she was. A few seconds later, she saw Brandon snoring sweetly in front of her. Barbara remembered that last night after Mr. Brandon's appeal, they stayed here. She did not know if he got better. At that moment, she realized that she could not move. The girl became scared that her body was not moving. Standing up, she saw the tentacles that were still holding her. These parts of the octopus's body were extremely slippery and unpleasant. Hearing Miss Barbara negotiating with the tentacles, Brandon woke up. The girl was glad that the guy woke up. She began to tell him that the tentacles, which were quite obedient yesterday, today suddenly did not obey at all, and also tied her to the bed. Brandon felt very awkward. He apologized again, reminding that he could not yet fully control them. The guy could not look at Barbara anymore, and his body became more restless. He asked the girl to be patient a little. Since the synchronization took place all night, he would be able to try to distinguish the movements of each tentacle. The body gradually adapted to the mutation, but now it was still wrapped in accordance with instinct, but should have already been at least a little connected with Brandon's thinking. Having established a connection with the tentacles, the boy experienced a strange sensation, as if he were stroking Barbara with many hands. The girl tried to hurry him up, since these insidious pieces of meat had already crawled into not very good places. Barbara was scared, but since they were pretending to be lovers, intimacy was definitely inevitable. But the sensations from this kind of game, like tying up, were too shameful. The girl even thought about what if there was nothing left to do but tear off the tentacles. But in that case, it could harm Mr. Brandon. The guy was very focused. He had one last tentacle left, just unite them all, and he would be able to let go of her body. Suddenly, he jumped up from his place. The tentacles crossed all boundaries, and Brandon was unable to take control of it. Tentacles kissed the girl on the cheek. Barbara laughed at what happened, and she reacted unexpectedly for the guy, saying that she should also reciprocate. She took the tentacle carefully and kissed it back. The kiss was passed on to Brandon, and he felt incredibly ashamed and awkward at the same time. After that, they released the girl. Barbara asked if the mister was able to fix his body, because after a few seconds, instead of the usual tentacles, human legs appeared. While Brandon couldn't understand how this was possible, the girl felt relieved. However, there were a lot of marks from the tentacles on her hands. Since the boy was born, he has never had a sudden recovery in the middle of a conversion. Therefore, both the onset of conversion and the reverse conversion now seem to be connected with Barbara, which is rather strange. Still, Brandon sincerely did not understand why everything was happening this way. Barbara's jewelry company headquarters. Although it was not necessary, it seemed to be her first time being late in the last 2 years. Fortunately, Mr. Brandon only goes to work in the afternoon. For a moment, the girl thought, realizing that there really were people in the world who could turn. Barbara's thoughts were interrupted by the secretary, who excitedly announced that they were in trouble. It turned out that the girl's mother had arrived at headquarters this morning. When Barbara confronted her mother, she asked her why she hadn't told her she was coming. The girl's mother replied that to inspect branches, you need to show up suddenly. She was the chairwoman of a jewelry company. In this situation, it was not for nothing that she arrived suddenly, since she did not find the CEO there. Barbara explained that this was the first time something like this had happened to her in 2 years, and that her friend had health problems. The girl's mother, Bella, noticed that her daughter had an injured wrist. The woman became furious and began to menacingly ask who dared to do this to her girl. Barbara tried to find the right words to explain it all. The tentacle marks don't actually look like they were made by any object. If mother investigates further, she may call a doctor to examine the injury. Taking her mother by the hands, Barbara asked her to calm down and listen. telling her that no one had hurt her and that it had all been done of her own free will. Seeing the bewilderment on her mother's face, the girl had no choice but to say that she was interested in this type of sex. Barbara shared that she recently got a boyfriend, and just yesterday she got to try it with him, adding that they did nothing else except tying up. She immediately tried to justify herself, saying that after she tried it, it hurt her a lot, and she realized that she was still a normal person and immediately stopped. After a short pause, the mother asked if what her daughter had just told her was true. Barbara began to nod her head, confirming her words that she was a normal person, and she had even managed to get a boyfriend, so her mother did not need to rush her anymore. Sitting down at her workplace, the girl offered to introduce her mother to her boyfriend if she still didn't trust her. The mother immediately agreed, which Barbara did not expect. The situation was that after the girl was dumped on her last date, she got drunk at a bar and met Mr. Brandon. Bella insistently assured her daughter that she had nothing to worry about. Her ex-boyfriend's family would be holding a reception the following week. The woman had originally planned to take Barbara with her to make amends with her ex-boyfriend, to mend fences between the two families, but now she can bring her boyfriend. Bella wanted to prove that her daughter was no slouch, and her ex-boyfriend's mother was constantly talking about what a good son she had, so she really wanted to see if he could find a new girlfriend so quickly. Barbara was very angry, but tried not to show it. Was she really like her mother, capable of taking her boyfriend to an appointment in order to prove something to someone? When she met Brandon, she explained everything to him. He didn't really have a choice, because if he didn't show up for the appointment, her mother would become suspicious, and there would be some complications with the plan to pretend to be her boyfriend. The girl promised to pay him 3 overtime hours if he would accompany her to the reception on Wednesday evening. After thinking for a bit, Brandon replied that he could in the evening, but not until the morning, since he had a transformation planned. Barbara was comfortable with this option because most of the receptions are recreational in nature, and there is generally no need to stay overnight. The guy promised to move his work to an earlier time by that time and come to the girl. The girl wished Brandon good luck with his work, saying that she would come to him soon to discuss all the cases, since her mother might ask all sorts of nonsense. The guy was willing to play along with Barbara, but before he did, he wanted to ask her one question. Brandon wanted to make sure once again that the girl really wanted to play a couple of lovers with him. Barbara didn't understand the question at all, because what was the point of her being here if she didn't want to do it? In this case, the guy decided to say directly that people in love do not call each other formally. Now these two didn't look like a couple at all. Barbara thought about it, because in fact, the two of them were more partners than lovers. Brandon meant that they needed to change more than just the way they communicated, but that needed to be done first. The feeling of coldness could be explained by the fact that they had not seen each other for a long time. The feeling of closeness could not be faked. It could only be experienced in small things. In that case, Barbara suggested that the guy give him a nickname, and that he also come up with a nickname for her. Moving closer to the girl, he said that he would call her Barbie. She agreed immediately, and it sounded pretty simple. But Barbara couldn't concentrate because Brandon's face was so close to hers. Suddenly, the girl's head began to hurt incredibly. The pain was simply terrible. A memory of herself at 8 years old, petting her new friend, came into her mind. Brandon asked excitedly what was wrong. Barbie reassured him, saying that she just had a headache and remembered a friend from childhood. The guy suggested that she lie down and do a one-finger palpation if she felt unwell. Brandon actually knew how to massage, because working in the service industry, you had to know such things. Looking into his eyes, Barbara asked if Mr. Boyfriend had just forgotten their agreement and called her miss again. Looking away, the guy justified himself by saying that he was still at work, but as soon as they were alone, everything would be different. It turns out that Barbie was her nickname, which reminded her of her childhood, and at that moment she felt a slight nostalgia. The girl shared with him that at that time she loved to go and play in the big yard, because there lived a very cute dog in the yard. Brandon became embarrassed by this topic, and he translated it by saying that the lady must have been very popular when she was a child. At that moment, he wondered why she suddenly remembered the dog. What was so special about it? As a child, Barbara's family cared only about her brother's future, and everyone tried to match her up as a child and marry her off when she came of age. Her father suggested that her mother wait until her daughter grew up a little and send her to the family as a bride. But her mother was against such abuse of her daughter. Every time this dog wagged his tail and barked, It was as if it was all just for her. The dog was the only creature that could prove that Barbara's personality also mattered. This is the reason why the girl really likes dogs. Brandon realized that Barbie's memories were indeed blurred and distorted, that she didn't remember him talking to her when he was a wolf cub. Instead, memory has turned everything into a more intelligent and normal process of communication between man and animal. The guy was perfectly aware that under no circumstances should he allow this girl to regain her memory. Wednesday, Lauren's family banquet. Barbara greeted her mother and said that she had come with her boyfriend. The mother was incredibly happy that her daughter had not deceived her, and the guy was also a real handsome guy. The girl introduced Brandon to her mother, and he bowed politely, greeting his mother. The guy smiled stupidly and introduced himself as Barbara's boyfriend. The girl froze in surprise. She had never seen Brandon smile before, and so sincerely. Bella really liked her daughter's boyfriend. In her opinion, he was cute and very tall. After her mother's words, Barbie's heart began to beat wildly. She thought it was because of lack of sleep. To distract her mother from unnecessary conversations, the girl suggested that she go and say hello to Lauren's family, who were just nearby. Without thinking twice, the woman immediately walked in their direction. Barbara pointed to a young man among Lauren's family, saying that he was her ex-boyfriend and also her childhood sweetheart from school days. When Bella approached the family, the young man greeted her kindly. Memories flashed through Brandon's mind. It seemed like he had heard about his childhood love from a girl in the past. This was one of the reasons why she always came to the animal. Barbara's father wanted her to marry an old man, and she was constantly getting into trouble and being bullied. The wolf was surprised that such a beautiful girl could be the subject of ridicule and bullying. She said that one strange boy was constantly bullying her. She didn't know why they liked to follow her and call her names, as well as pull her hair, tear up her textbooks. There was pity and terrible resentment in the wolf cub's eyes for the little girl. She was not a monster and had done nothing bad, but she was treated so terribly. Baby Barbie suspected that she was simply hated, because the book said that people would be hostile to anything that did not match their own perception. The wolf cub understood her like no one else. He was also abandoned here by his own parents, because he was born an animal. Barbara jumped when she heard about her parents. She rushed to hug the animal. The girl was sincerely happy that in front of her was a person, and not a dog, as she thought. The kids said that, according to these uncles and aunts of the researchers, since the meteorite fell, mutant people have appeared on Earth. Their original form is unstable, and therefore they could transform into other living or non-living life forms. Barbie thought it was amazing, and she had hope that the wolf cub could become human again. Out of happiness, she asked permission if she could watch him transform into a human. It just so happened that when the time came for the transformation, this child did not know whether Barbara would like him as a person. As soon as the transformation happened, the girl immediately grabbed his face and screamed that he was incredibly cute. The boy waved her hand away and said that it wasn't true. He didn't think so. Barbie was overjoyed and even said that it would be great if he became her childhood sweetheart. The main goal of the evening was to make Barbara's mom believe in the fact that she and Brandon were in love. If she believed it, she would grumble less every day. The girl whispered to her companion that this had nothing to do with young Mr. Lauren, so he should simply be avoided. Barbara knew better than anyone that this guy was very stubborn and difficult to deal with. It would be very troublesome to become his target. If Brandon does run into him, the girl asked to be given the opportunity to deal with Mr. Lauren personally, otherwise there will be no end to this. The young man was the first to approach the couple, displaying a joyful smile at the unexpected meeting and offering to talk. Barbara warned that the relationship between them was too delicate, and if Mr. Lauren was so free, then he would be better off spending more time with his fans. The guy turned out to be too stubborn. He reminded the girl that he had no fans, which could not be said about her. Stepping forward, Brandon greeted Mr. Lauren, saying that no matter who he was, Barbara had not had dinner yet, so they should go. The girl was delighted with what had happened, as she expected from a professional. If she had not known in advance that this was just a professional hazard, she would have thought that Mr. Brandon was jealous. Barbara's mother was also watching this situation, and apparently was very pleased. Taking her companion by the arm, the girl said that it was time for them to go and not to disturb Mr. Lauren. The young man sharply pointed his hand towards Barbara, but she managed to intercept it and asked in an absolutely calm tone if he needed anything else. He was clearly out of his mind, calling the girl completely uncooperative, as she had been since childhood. For him, it was disgusting. Mr. Lauren thought that Barbara would never panic and would never flatter like others. Will stand next to him and walk hand in hand. For some reason, everything happened the other way around. Even during her school days, the girl didn't pay any attention to him. Every time she came up with some excuse, when he invited her to the movies or for a walk, Barbara pretended not to understand what Mr. Lauren was talking about. 8 o'clock in the evening, ladies' room. The girl's mother was very pleased, and the son of the Lauren family had not done anything wrong, so she thought that she and Brandon might not stay long and therefore return home. I had to leave before midnight, otherwise Mr. Brandon might contact me. A girl came into the toilet and asked Barbara to disturb her a little. The stranger introduced herself as Daphne. She was 28 years old, the heiress of the Ralph family technology. Barbara shook her hand happily. She had heard about her. Then the girl asked how she could help. As it turned out, her question was somewhat trivial. Daphne was planning to propose to her boyfriend, whom she had known for many years, and wanted to order a ring. But the ring is quite unusual, so if she goes to the store, she will definitely be rejected. Barbara clarified how unusual the ring was, since it was possible to make any ring as long as it did not exceed the material limit. Miss Ralph wanted to order a large quantity of men's rings, ranging in diameter from 1 millimeter to 5 centimeters, with smooth size adjustments, and price was not a problem for her. The girl didn't understand if there was any point in making so many rings, only if there were a lot of guys, but this information didn't add up. That's why Daphne didn't order from the store. She didn't want people to ask about it. She didn't want to reveal her little secret. Barbara didn't particularly like to pry into other people's secrets, so she said that she was waiting for the girl in her free time in her company, and they would try to find a suitable model. Brandon began to worry that his companion was gone for a long time. The body was a little restless, and he had to suppress it. Mr. Brandon's loneliness was interrupted by Mr. Lauren. It turned out that he was looking not for Barbara, but for him. The guy decided to ask directly what the conditions would be for Brandon to break up with Miss Barbara. Mr. Lauren didn't want to be like the evil mother-in-law in the soap operas and send people away with money, but he thought the guy might need it. The young gentleman believed that as a bartender, Brandon should want to have his own establishment, so he was ready to offer it to him. Brandon replied, completely calmly, that he did not understand how one of Mr. Lauren's establishments could compare with Barbara's entire family. With a smirk on his face, the guy told the young gentleman that if he accepted his offer, he would get no more than one establishment. But if he took good care of Barbie, he would become the future son-in-law of her family. So if Mr. Lauren wants Brandon to keep Barbie, then he's going to have to offer more than her family's worth. The gentleman took a step back, simply amazed by this guy's ambition. Luckily, he had prepared for all possible scenarios. Their conversation was interrupted by Barbara's return. She reminded him that time was running out and they had to go, but Mr. Lauren stopped her. He took out the phone from his pocket that was recording the conversation, saying that he had something that she should definitely listen to. After listening to the recording to the end, he asked with a sly smile if she was sure she should go with Brandon. With a smile on his face, Mr. Lauren asked Barbara if she recognized the voice of the guy who was standing next to her now, because he was not really what he seemed. On the contrary, he is eager to take possession of Barbara's family property. Taking Brandon by the arm, the girl replied that she was aware of all this. They turned and walked away, but Mr. Lauren did not stop. He ran after the couple, shouting. He screamed that Brandon didn't really love her, but was just using her. So would she really leave it like that? Turning around, Barbara said that the gentleman was going too far, and that he had better not interfere in her personal affairs with her boyfriend. Having resolved the problem, the couple went home. The girl asked Brandon where he lived, if it was on the way to her house. Then she said that she had been drinking, so she couldn't drive. But fortunately, her companion had a driver's license. They agreed that he would take her home, and then call himself a taxi. At first, Barbara suggested that Brandon simply drive her car home and return it the next time they met. But then she changed her mind. The girl invited the guy to stay with her, since he had already asked for time off from work, and she had a guest room. Brandon thought Barbara had forgotten what had just happened. He reminded her that he had bad intentions towards her family, and that he was a bad guy who was taking advantage of her position. The girl didn't understand now whether he was joking or really thought so. It's easy to get huge wealth. Isn't that the opportunity everyone dreams of? Brandon asked. Barbara agreed with his words. but such a marriage was not suitable for slackers, because if you want to have power, then first you must improve your performance and prove your success. The guy assumed that the girl didn't understand what she was talking about. Didn't she really care that after marriage, half of her property would be taken by a man who didn't love her? Barbara understood everything, but if Mr. Brandon could say that, it proved that what he said to Mr. Lauren was intentional. The girl didn't think the guy was interested in her family's property, but she had to ask the question. Barbara asked if she really wanted to buy a marriage with Brandon with money. Would he agree? The guy wouldn't be against it. He believed that feelings and money were completely different concepts. As a child at the research center, he overheard doctors talking about how Barbara's family's money had already arrived. This family has always given the most money and seems to have genuinely supported the captive program. The newly arrived test subjects were also bought by this family. Otherwise, how could it be possible to kill people at this center? Such people were treated at the research center as monsters in human form. If they died, they died. The boy didn't want to doubt his new friend, but it seemed that she, too, was from a large family. One day, Brandon asked Barbie if she had heard of Dawn's company. The girl not only heard about it, but was also well acquainted with this company, since it belonged to her family. Barbara tapped Brandon on the shoulder repeatedly, asking what he was so lost in thought that he wasn't even answering her. The guy apologized, lying that he was just too focused on the road. The girl agreed with his words that work gives more than a partner, but sometimes she also wanted to experience feelings so desperately, like a moth flying to a flame. For Brandon, feeling like a moth to a flame wasn't exactly fun, especially when the difference in power between the two was too great. Barbara admitted that she used to have no strength, but now she is confident. There must be something you can do for your partner. Finally, they arrived. Brandon asked the girl to walk carefully, without rushing. She invited him to park and come over to her place, as they had too little time to get close. Brandon insisted that it was very dangerous to invite a man into the house. He asked her to respect herself. Covering his face with his hands, the guy asked them to leave him alone and quickly leave. It seems Mr. Brandon has approached ahead of time. It took Barbara about a second to think what to do. Having covered the guy with a blanket, they quickly ran to the girl's house. Even the security guard didn't have time to understand what had happened. After a couple of minutes, Barbara breathed a sigh of relief. They were safe. She immediately reassured Brandon by saying that her house was under closed management and no one would come here. The girl was quite shocked to see the tentacles, but she didn't think that there could be something like that. Opening the edge of the blanket, she saw a real polar bear. The bear only growled. Barbara assumed that in this form he could not speak, so she decided to ask what he would eat, raw meat or something else. The animal began to growl even louder, which amused the girl. She asked him not to shit anywhere, and everything else could be discussed after he came to his senses. After these words, she opened the doors of her apartment and invited him inside. Brandon immediately turned his attention to the huge number of dogs. Did Barbara really like them that much? The girl also strictly ordered him that the bear should not dare to chew her toys. After leading the animal into the guest room, Barbara pointed to a huge bed where he could lie down and rest. Brandon tried very hard to show that he could push down this bed with his enormous weight. The girl asked her guest what to order for the morning, sashimi or just salmon. Without waiting for an answer, she went to make the order. Otherwise, it would not be delivered early in the morning. The bear fell into despair. He could not tell her that he could eat ordinary human food. Since he definitely couldn't sleep on the bed, Brandon decided to sleep on the floor. The guy had caused her trouble again, and if this continued, Barbara would suffer sooner or later. Just like that time when the boy attacked her, accusing her of knowing who caused him to go through all this. Barbie honestly didn't understand what happened, but Brandon was sure that she betrayed him, because he trusted her, and she ended up on the side of the one who hurt him. The girl begged him to calm down. She really didn't understand what he was talking about. Brandon thought it was strange that Barbara had suddenly appeared. Obviously, people like him were worthless, and no one could like him. He suspected that the girl was communicating with him for a completely different reason, and he wanted to find out the purpose of her arrival on the territory of the research center. A tear rolled down Barbara's eye. She was so hurt that Brandon didn't believe that she liked him. The boy was furious. He demanded an explanation of whether she wanted to experiment on him or just look at the monster up close. If it weren't for Barbara's family, Brandon wouldn't have been given such a huge amount of drugs. If it weren't for them, he wouldn't be in so much pain. The boy had to fight the monster inside him that wanted Barbie dead. But Brandon didn't want to kill her. He was in so much pain. He didn't know why he was in so much pain. He should have hated this girl, but he couldn't. And he didn't want her to hate him. When Brandon collapsed on Barbie, she promised him that she would help him escape. He even stood up because he couldn't believe his ears. The girl repeated once again that she would help her friend escape. For most of her life, Barbara was tormented by the same nightmare. A monster told her that she had to become an outstanding person. She could not stumble and disgrace her family. She should not think about whether it was right or not, but simply listen and obey the orders of her elders. The girl jumped up abruptly. She had another nightmare. During this time, she constantly had a dream about a monster wrapping itself around her, and sometimes it seemed like she was hallucinating. It was very strange. On the way to get water, Barbara stepped on something furry. It was a bear that was sleeping right on the floor. Brandon was sleeping like a log. Even when she stepped on him, he didn't move. Was he really that tired? Speaking of this, it becomes clear that those mutated into animals cannot speak. For some reason, Barbara still thought that animals were capable of speaking like people. The girl tried to reassure herself that she couldn't confuse her feelings for the puppy with Mr. Brandon. It was disrespectful to both of them. She found herself thinking that Mr. Lorne was right when he said that Brandon was only doing everything for the money and not because he liked her. Even if this guy didn't have feelings for Barbara, he was so fluffy now, polar bears were pretty rare. The girl plopped right into it to enjoy the soft, fluffy cloud, and Brandon missed the best moment to wake up. He felt it, but he couldn't open his eyes now, because they would probably both be very embarrassed. The bear decided to pretend to be simply fast asleep, and when the girl got tired, he would leave. Barbara had the idea to find out whether it was a male or a female, since Mr. Brandon was not dressed when he transformed. The bear was extremely agitated. The girl was a demon. She really treated him like an animal, but it was impossible to continue in the same spirit. Brandon lowered his paw, pinning Barbara down. Finding herself trapped, the girl began to quietly call the bear, thinking that he had woken up. The animal pretended to be asleep. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Barbara buried her face in his soft and warm body, wanting to sleep. After some time, Brandon suddenly turned into a human again. The guy had almost gotten used to the feeling of losing control. Waking up in her bed in the morning, Barbara tried to understand how this happened. She had fallen asleep on the floor with the bear yesterday. Had she really dreamed it? A few seconds later, she heard some knocking in the kitchen. Entering the kitchen, Barbara found Brandon there, who was cutting salmon. She asked him when he managed to turn back. Was it really as suddenly as last time? The girl suggested that because the appeals occur earlier, their duration is reduced. But since only 2 similar situations occurred, it was too early to draw conclusions. The guy said he signed for the salmon delivery. The fish was very big. The human body can't eat that much, so Brandon took over the kitchen without permission. Turning to Barbara, he asked if there was anything she would like to have for lunch. The girl appreciated the guy's housekeeping skills. She noticed that he decided to cook her a bento for breakfast, fried rice with salmon. The guy had nothing to do in the morning, so he said he would bring food to her company when she was ready. Brandon knew that this food was best eaten fresh. The taste would be a little different if left out for too long. Barbara was very happy about the home-cooked food, as she had not cooked at home for quite a long time and had already missed it. The girl laughed, calling the gentleman so caring that she even wanted to marry him. After these words, the guy froze. Memories popped into his head. As a child, he greedily ate the food that Barbie brought him. The girl asked him to eat more slowly, because no one would take his food away from him. But Brandon had never eaten such delicious food. Having eaten Barbara's entire lunch down to the last crumb, the boy began to worry that now she would remain hungry because of him. But the girl reassured him, since she had eaten her fill at breakfast and was still full. She opened the box of dessert and suggested that they try the cakes together. Brandon was simply stunned when he saw such cute puppies. The boy asked why one of the puppies was gray, and it turned out that Barbie had asked the chef to teach her how to cook it. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make them round and cute. Brandon assumed that his friend was trying to make a puppy that looked like him. Barbie was very embarrassed by this guess, but the boy still thought that this was exactly how it was. She snatched the gray puppy from Brandon's hands and started screaming that it wasn't tasty anyway, not allowing him to eat the cake. The boy screamed that it wasn't right. It was obvious that it looked like him, which meant it was meant for him. He tried to take his cake back, because words were not allowed, but Barbie was on the verge of dropping the puppy. With a happy face, Brandon intercepted his gray puppy, not noticing how he ended up on the girl. She begged him not to eat that cake, but he wasn't going to listen to her. In that case, she took it and was the first to bite off a piece of this gray puppy. It was really hard to eat. It tasted like it was burnt. Brandon bit the opposite side of the cake, and the pair froze as their faces came very close to each other. Barbara immediately let go of the cake. She was not happy because she was convinced that guys and girls are not allowed to kiss before marriage. Otherwise, they might not get married. Brandon's eyes lit up, and he asked with hope in his voice, if Barbara married him, would they be able to kiss? The boy asked her to wait for him, promising to definitely marry Barbie when he got out of this terrible place. The girl did not expect such a confession. She could not believe that Brandon would replace the one her father chose and marry her. On this day, the children agreed that they would definitely get married in the future. Even though he promised, unfortunately, in the end, Brandon still betrayed Barbie. Miss Barbara's jewelry company office. The girl proposed a specific design to Daphne, in which the large rings were easy to process, and the smaller rings would be realized for her using micro-engraving technology. Daphne really liked the idea and decided to go with it, asking if she could also add an engraving of her name on the inside of the ring. For Barbara, it was absolutely no problem. She asked to send the text that the girl would like to write, or just say the name of her lover. Suddenly, the client's phone rang. It was her boyfriend. Barbie thought it was strange that instead of a ringtone, she was hearing her boyfriend's voice. Daphne stepped away to talk, but Miss could still hear the girl justifying herself by saying that she wasn't fooling around, but was just minding her own business, asking her boyfriend to trust her. She asked her boyfriend in surprise if he was outside now. The girl asked him not to go up, saying that she would come down right away, but he immediately hung up. Barbara sat there in complete bewilderment, and the client apologized to her, explaining that her boyfriend had installed a couple's navigation app on her phone and was now sitting downstairs waiting for her. Daphne would probably have to bring the guy here, so she asked the miss for one favor, to deceive him, pretending that they were just spending time together in female company. It was impossible to describe in words what Barbara thought about this man, who had set up a geolocation, was following the girl, and was about to get up to check on her. Miss had no choice and agreed, but she doubted that this guy was okay. There was a knock on the office door, and Daphne's boyfriend, who worked as a biotechnologist, came in and said with displeasure that he had finally found her. Suddenly, Robert started shouting that he couldn't stand it anymore, that his girlfriend's behavior had been very strange in recent days, that she was going to shopping malls but returning without making any purchases. He demanded an explanation of what she was doing behind his back. Daphne immediately began to justify herself by saying that she had met with an old friend. They had gone shopping and chatted. The girl introduced Barbara to Robert as her best friend. Daphne apologized in advance for her boyfriend, as he usually spends time in the lab and is not used to interacting with people. Robert started shouting that it was all a lie, that his girlfriend had never liked to go shopping before, let alone spend the whole day with someone. Here he began to scream so loudly that Barbara's hair stood on end. This madman assumed that Daphne was in love with her friend, and that was why she was hiding. Barbie was confused and tried to explain that they were both girls, but Robert interrupted her, saying that feelings could also arise between members of the same sex. The guy was sure that his girlfriend was cheating on him because she was already bored with him. Clutching his head and almost crying, he began to reproach himself for doing something wrong or for them having a crisis of 7 years of relationship. The guy began to pitifully promise that he would change. Then she started talking to herself, accusing him of being just a worthless man. Falling to his knees, Robert said that it was quite natural that Daphne did not like his behavior. Hugging his girlfriend, the guy began to beg her not to leave him and not to go away, although she did not say a word about leaving. From Barbara's face, Daphne realized that the girl thought her boyfriend was crazy. She asked her not to be afraid of him. This person's emotions were unstable. The application to track her location was also installed with her permission. Barbara pretended to understand, but said she didn't expect Miss Daphne to like that type of guy. The girl didn't think about the type. It just dawned on her one day that Robert was the best. Barbara decided to take matters into her own hands. Turning to the guy, she asked him for permission to tell the whole truth. Supposedly, in reality, she and Daphne are just regular friends. The reason they've been shopping lately was because she wants to pick out a birthday present for her boyfriend. Since Barbara couldn't decide, she had to turn to Daphne for help. This version was perfect, because you can always pretend to be a girl who always thinks only about relationships. Wiping tears from his eyes, Robert happily said that it made sense. He also came to the conclusion that Daphne couldn't leave him and that he was just thinking too much. Barbara had already breathed a sigh of relief, since the trouble had passed, but Robert asked her to tell him about her boyfriend's hobbies. He believed that since he was also a man, the options he proposed would also have weight. Laughing stupidly, the girl began to deny that it was no longer a problem, or rather, she didn't even have a so-called boyfriend. Robert looked at her suspiciously, not understanding why Barbara was refusing, or whether her words were a complete lie. The situation was dire. They had to come up with something on the fly, however. The girl had already promised that she would help Daphne until the end. Suddenly, the secretary knocked on the door. The girl said that Mr. Brandon had come and brought lunch. There was quite a lot of food, so the secretary asked if it was worth inviting guests to eat together. Barbara immediately rushed to the door to be the first to see her so-called boyfriend. Seeing Barbara's worried face, Brandon guiltily said that he would leave right now since he had disturbed her. She grabbed his hand and pulled him along with her. Lunch took place in the reception room. Barbara introduced Brandon as her boyfriend, asking if there was any reason to worry now. But Robert replied that he had not suspected his girlfriend from the beginning. Daphne was delighted with the food that Mr. Brandon had prepared and said that Barbara was such a lucky girl. Robert tensed up. He was trying to prove that he could do it too, and so that his girlfriend wouldn't praise another man. The food was really incredibly delicious. Daphne suggested her boyfriend to see for himself. He didn't mind. Putting a piece of fish in his mouth, Robert agreed with the girl. The dish really wasn't bad. Suddenly, the boy doubled over in pain and started screaming that there were peanuts in the food. Daphne asked Mrs. Barbara to lock the room and not let anyone in. Barbie and Brandon were confused, not understanding what was happening. Everything happened too suddenly. Finally, Miss came to her senses and suggested going to the hospital if Robert was that bad. No one paid attention to her words. Only Brandon abruptly grabbed the girl by the hand. Barbara indignantly asked why he was pulling her hand, but the guy did not answer. He just did not take his eyes off Daphne and Robert. After a few seconds, Daphne's boyfriend began to shrink in size. Barbara couldn't believe her eyes. Was Robert really the same as Brandon? Mr. Robert was the same as Brandon. He also had some kind of mutation. Now that the couple had seen it all for themselves, Daphne and her boyfriend had nothing to hide. The girl tried to explain that her boyfriend sometimes shrinks, but he is not a monster and is still sane. But he was so small that the handkerchief covered his entire body. Barbara and Brandon approached him to take a closer look. The guy started yelling at them not to come near him because men and women can't touch each other because he has a girlfriend. Robert has had a peanut allergy since childhood, although it is not serious. But if he accidentally eats products with peanuts, a transformation occurs. Unfortunately, the dish Brandon cooked had peanut butter in it. Robert sometimes just grew or shrank a few centimeters. Sometimes he became very big or very small. Fortunately, this time he didn't get bigger. Brandon apologized for not knowing the gentleman had an allergy, but Daphne didn't blame him, as she herself hadn't expected there to be peanut butter in the fish. It didn't matter much to Barbara's client, unless it scared her and Brandon. But this was a human mutation, so it had to remain a secret. Without thinking, Barbara asked the girl if she understood correctly that she had ordered so many sizes so that her husband could wear the ring in any situation. Robert didn't quite understand what order was being discussed, and the girl had to be disingenuous in this situation so as not to reveal the secret. She changed the subject by saying that they would not tell anyone about the situation, since they knew people like no one else. Left alone, Barbara told Brandon that she didn't expect Miss Daphne's fiancé to have the same abilities. Were there really that many mutants? From the guy's reaction, the girl realized that he was not happy that he had a comrade. Brandon said he was very happy to leave the research center. He naturally knew there was more than one mutant, but now he was just thinking that the condition for Robert's mutation was peanuts. In that case, he must also have some kind of mutation condition, but he didn't know what. Speaking of which, whenever Mr. Brandon suddenly mutated, Barbara was there every time. The guy confirmed that this always happened, without exception. Barbie suggested an experiment. They were already living together anyway, and Brandon was still coming to her tonight. The guy became a little tense when he heard about the experiment. Brandon thought he wouldn't remember it, but he still remembered it clearly. He had to let this girl go because his existence would only bring her trouble. Suddenly, his gaze fell on Barbara's underwear, which was hanging in the bathroom. The girl remembered that she forgot to take things from the bathroom, and it seemed to be underwear. She felt awkward at the thought of Mr. Brandon seeing him. Brandon thought, and decided that if Miss Barbara was the trigger for the mutation, then an experiment should be conducted. Because if the frequency of mutations could be controlled, then in the future, the guy could find a normal job. The girl agreed, but first she suggested washing, since the smell of perfume in the store was too strong, and then conducting an experiment after the shower. She sent Brandon to the shower first, as she had some more work to take care of. The guy blamed himself for daring to enter her apartment, and especially her bathroom. Then he began to reassure himself that he was making it all up, and that Barbara had no feelings for him. As a child, Barbie took a quick peek at her father's computer and realized something. The reason the aunts and uncles can find him is because of the tracking device that is injected under the mutant's skin, meaning it must first be removed before they can escape. The device was supposed to be in his leg, but Brandon felt nothing. Barbie carefully felt his leg and found something, and now the boy felt it too. The girl asked if he was afraid of pain. Brandon was not afraid of pain, but he did not like it. After all, he experienced it every day. Looking into his eyes, Barbie asked Brandon if he believed her. Of course he believed her, even though he had not understood her before. But now this girl was his dearest friend. With a smile on his face, Brandon said that she would definitely become his wife in the future. Barbie promised to start reading medical books again, and to definitely save her friend. She held a knife in her hands, and her hands were shaking incredibly with fear. Barbara was afraid that she might cut too much, or that adults might see it. Taking her hands, Brandon tried to calm the girl down. He could pretend to be sick, and they wouldn't touch him for 2 days. Then he would avoid the experiment, and no one would notice anything. Barbara started shaking all over with fear. She had never done anything like this before. She was afraid that there would be a lot of blood, and she wouldn't be able to stop it. Brandon believed her, and so he asked her to believe him. There was great hope for freedom in this boy's eyes. Barbie trusted him like no one else, so she did this for him and his happy life outside the walls of this hell. The girl knocked on the bathroom door and asked to open it so that she could take her personal belongings. There was only silence in response. She began to worry that Mr. Brandon was silent, suspecting that he might have transformed again. The house was well soundproofed, but it was impossible for the guy not to hear Barbara at such a close distance, and besides, the water didn't make any noise. Listening closely, the girl heard some rustling and an incomprehensible sound. She heard him give her permission to enter the bathroom. Entering the room, Barbara was surprised by what she saw. Brandon was little again, not understanding why he had suddenly transformed. The girl picked him up in her arms, and the guy started screaming at her not to pull his underwear down. It took Barbara a moment to realize that he'd only been wearing briefs before he shrank, but she figured a guy didn't need to cover his entire body with them. The girl laughed that with such a size it was almost impossible to see anything. She also noticed that she was not there when Brandon transformed. This could mean that the previous transformations were an accident. The guy looked away. In fact, his next sudden transformation was connected with Barbara, or rather, with her underwear in the bathroom. The girl wanted to hear why he thought the latest transformation was related to her. Brandon said that today's mutation occurred outside of the cycle, confirming that external factors still have an influence. To begin with, the guy asked to give him a handkerchief or a towel instead of clothes, and his underwear needed to be washed. He froze in bewilderment. He felt uneasy about what Barbara had planned. In front of the guy appeared a dollhouse that the girl had recently bought for a girl who had recently visited her. Barbie thought it was very cute. Brandon shared her feelings only when he wasn't wearing these women's dresses, and asked if there were any men's clothes. The girl began to search, but immediately warned that there were no men's clothes in such houses. Her eyes sparkled. She found what she was looking for. Among the beautiful doll dresses, she found a prince's costume. While Brandon was changing, Barbara said she would call Miss Daphne and find out about the precautions for shrinking. Seeing the guy in a prince costume, the girl could not contain her admiration. He looked like a prince from a fairy tale, a little prince. Brandon smiled, reminding her that Miss Barbara had said before that she wasn't interested in princes, and indeed, the girl wasn't interested in them. But at least she knew something. Approaching the guy, the girl began to admire him. He was so cute when he was little. She really liked him. Her hand reached out to him. She wanted so much to touch him. This little, sweet Brandon. Barbara lifted him into the air and thought about what it would be like to have a pocket boyfriend, someone you could cuddle. The guy was as warm as a normal person, but he didn't like her touching him everywhere. The girl couldn't stop admiring him, being touched by his every action, especially when he ate. She couldn't help herself and decided to capture the moment on her phone. In his little man form, Brandon proved to be very helpful, finding Barbara's ring behind the closet. The very ring she thought she had lost. The guy really was like a little prince, so responsible. When the girl called him a prince once again, Brandon whispered that he didn't look like a prince at all. To avoid unnecessary questions, he said that he would go and take another look. Maybe he would find something else. They seemed to be from different worlds, as if God had parted the clouds and Barbara had found a strange toy. Intimacy was just a whim on her part. Brandon was sure that when she got bored, she would leave without looking back. The girl stopped him and asked if the little prince would mind helping her take some photos. Barbara handed him the ring, asking him to put it on her finger, and she would take a couple of photos. Brandon didn't understand why she was asking him to put a ring on her when she could do it herself. After talking with Miss Daphne, the girl thought about many things. If there are many mutants in the world, like Mr. Robert and Mr. Brandon, would they want a ring that they can wear during mutation? After the mutation, there is a high probability that the jewelry will not fit in size, and an illusion arises that after the mutation, it is no longer your beloved. Of course, most people don't care about this, but there are probably those who care, because a person after a mutation still remains a partner. Barbara came up with a new marketing ploy for her company, making rings to order, regardless of model, size, and specificity. Brandon agreed to help her. The girl was very grateful to him, asking him to put the ring on as if she were putting it on the finger of a princess. The guy thought that the promise he made to Barbie as a child, that he would take her as his wife, was time to come true. Barbara managed to take some very successful shots. In one of the latest, Brandon very photogenically kissed a girl on the finger after putting a ring on her. Barbara immediately called the guy to tell him whether he had heard about the ad or not. But those same photos had already been processed and were starting to be published. Not only did the ad generate buzz, but her company also received several orders from supposed mutants. Mr. Brandon was great. The girl suggested that the guy quit his job as a hostess and become a full-time model, but was refused. Barbara was aware of the state of Brandon's body, which could simply transform during filming. The guy asked her if she was afraid that since she was using photos of the hostess in advertising, her jewelry company's reputation would suffer. Barbara tried to calm him down, saying that after the treatment, her appearance had changed a lot. But if it caused trouble for Mr. Brandon, she apologized. For the guy, it was not a problem. He thought that people who looked the same could easily be confused. He decided not to develop this topic, but asked what her plans were for the evening. Due to the reduction in shifts, he had more free time. Barbara wanted to introduce Mr. Brandon to her family, so she invited him to dinner. But her family was not the most simple, so he needed to be prepared. The guy asked to tell it like it is. But in reality, there was nothing special. Her biological parents had long since divorced, and now her mother lived with her stepfather. They had a good relationship, so Brandon could easily call him uncle. The guy decided to show some impudence and asked how long ago her parents had been divorced, but Barbara didn't understand why he was so interested. She seemed to be in elementary school during that period, but she didn't remember exactly. The girl's parents greeted the couple kindly, and their daughter warned them that she and Brandon would be coming here for the night during their vacation. The guy tried to be as modest and polite as possible to make a good impression. Bella introduced her husband and Barbara's stepfather to Brandon. The man praised Travis. He told the boy to just call him Uncle Travis. The couple also didn't forget about gifts. Barbie prepared a tea set for her stepfather, although she presented it as if Brandon had bought it himself, since he found out that his uncle liked them. The girl brought a swallow's nest to her mother. Travis invited the guys to settle in, and he went to make some tea. Brandon volunteered to help the man in the kitchen. The uncle was surprised, as he did not think that young people today had culinary skills. Barbara was constantly working, so it was a great relief for Travis to learn of her boyfriend's existence. Brandon was extremely surprised when he found out that the girl's family cooked their own meals. He thought they had a housekeeper or something like that. Travis laughed. They had workers, but his wife liked it when he did housework. The man was from a simple family and not so spoiled. There was silence in the kitchen until Brandon broke it by asking if he could ask a question. After a couple of seconds, he decided it was better not to, so he told the man to forget it. The man was smart enough to figure out that Brandon wanted to ask him that. When he met his wife, he felt pressured and considered himself unworthy of her. Travis laughed. A lot of people had their own quirks. Bella was really with a decent man in her previous marriage, but she wasn't happy. Later, she met Travis, even though they had their ups and downs too. Next to him, she could laugh, get angry, throw things and cry uncontrollably. And then the man realized that the difference in status meant nothing. He promised himself that as long as she needed him, he would be her best choice. The room that was allocated to Brandon and Barbara had a simply enormous bed. The guy didn't quite understand what Bella meant. The woman said that the guest rooms were still being renovated, and this was the only one that was suitable. The room was all pink, like for a girl, and as it turned out, it was Barbara's room. The mother wanted the couple to have fun, but she was still worried that her daughter would not get married. But asking about separate rooms was strange now. Barbara said they would sleep under 2 different blankets so they wouldn't disturb each other, but Brandon said he could lie on the floor. The girl was not going to allow this. It was too much. He was already constantly helping her, and at the same time he slept on the floor. She was the first to go to the bathroom to change into her pajamas. Although Barbara pretended to be calm, she was worried about how it happened that they ended up sleeping together. She was worried that she was overdoing it, and that every day stupid Mr. Brandon seemed to pretend that everything was normal. These thoughts made her heart beat very fast. An image of her running through the forest with a boy appeared in her mind, tears welling up in his eyes, begging her not to run so fast. He stumbled and fell. They needed to run because the alarm had gone off, and the research center would soon discover that Brandon was missing. Barbie had promised to cover for him, but they needed to take a break later. The boy asked for forgiveness, because it was for his sake that the girl wanted to run away together. Barbie tried to convince him that everything was okay, but they couldn't go to the hotel without ID, so she was going to take him to school and hide him there for a while. She promised to bring him food and money every day, and then, most likely, no one would remember him. Barbie swore that she would definitely save him. The girl couldn't remember what had just happened. She seemed to remember something, but she couldn't understand what exactly. The boy in the memory looked very much like Mr. Brandon. Barbara frowned, trying to figure out what it meant. Maybe she was overtired. That's why some fragments were popping up in her head. Returning from the shower, the guy noticed that the girl was sleeping on the floor, but they were supposed to sleep together on the bed. He began to gently wake her up and whisper for Barbara to lie down on the bed. He felt terribly uncomfortable because of this situation. Pulling a pillow over her face, the girl said she wanted to sleep, but it seemed she had no intention of getting up from the floor. This miss was incorrigible. Brandon began to think about how he should act in such a situation. Wrapping her in a blanket, the guy lifted Barbara from the floor. Having laid her on the bed, she began to scream, asking what he had thought of. A little confused, Brandon replied that he thought that she would be much more comfortable on the bed. His voice was very convincing, and she had no choice but to agree with him. The guy hugged the girl and told her to sleep, and tomorrow he and her stepfather would go to the market together. Barbara didn't understand what she was doing. Her heart was beating like crazy. In the last few days, she was simply not herself. Perhaps this state was due to her last memories. The girl immediately began to reassure herself that she was simply overexcited due to lack of sleep and nothing more. This is just what she needed. Mrs. Bella was very excited in the morning when she talked to someone on the phone. She was expecting someone to visit, someone who clearly needed their help. Having overheard the conversation, Barbara asked who would come to them, but the woman herself did not know. One friend told her that he was extremely interested in a poster in his daughter's jewelry store, a photo with little Brandon, so Bella wanted to find out everything when he came to visit. What he heard made the guy feel uneasy. 15 minutes later, the car pulled up to Barbara's family's house. The woman was very worried. She immediately asked where the child was. This woman's name was Miss Rosie. She was the deputy of a biopharmaceutical company, and next to her was her husband Charles, the director of this company. If they hadn't accidentally noticed the poster, they wouldn't have known that their long-lost son was alive. The boy was about 7 years old at the time. This little boy disappeared so suddenly then, Miss Rosie was still worried about it. The woman began to cry and blame herself for everything. Not understanding why God had done this to her, her younger son was lost, and the older one was running out of time. With curiosity and sympathy, Mrs. Bella asked what was wrong with their eldest son. The guy had been having health problems for 2 years already. The family didn't want to fight all his life, lose support and heritage. That's why they were so nervous. When they saw Brandon's photo, they were delighted and came immediately. Hearing a name that was very familiar to her, Mrs. Bella asked if it was a coincidence. Barbara carefully asked the gentleman if he was the one they were talking about, if he was the one who ran away from home as a child. Brandon was so depressed that he couldn't say a word. He just grabbed his head. He remembered the obstetrician screaming that Mrs. Rosie had given birth to a monster. The boy was born in the form of a little wolf cub. No one would ever believe that some people are destined to be born a mistake. Brandon was born into a wonderful family. His dad, mom, and older brother were all handsome. Unfortunately, the youngest son was completely different. He could transform. One day, Brandon heard his father was at a loss and did not know what to do next, as his company's capital had collapsed. One day, while walking around the city, his father bought him ice cream and asked him to wait for him at this place. The boy knew that it would be easier for his family to get rid of him. Brandon had long since finished his ice cream, but his father had not returned for him. He stood and waited for him, all alone, a little abandoned boy. After some time, an unfamiliar car drove up to him. People dragged him inside, and from then on, the hell of his life began. Barbara tried her best to bring the guy to his senses, but he told her that he wouldn't be able to go out. The girl had never asked him about his family before, but Brandon's family owned a biopharmaceutical company, and she dared to suggest that they could help the guy. Looking fearfully into the girl's eyes, the guy said in a trembling voice that he and his family were complete strangers. There was a moment of awkward silence between the couple. Gently taking her so-called fiancé's hand, Barbara said they could leave. She suggested that they climb out of the window now, since they were now on the first floor. In his eyes, Brandon saw the same situation that happened many years ago, like the little Barbie girl screaming that there was fire everywhere and they couldn't escape. She had to do everything she could to get her friend out. Otherwise, they would send him back to the lab, and it would all be for nothing. Barbie said she would hold them off, and Brandon should run away as fast as he could, because as long as her father was here, nothing would happen to her. Before she could answer, the girl rushed to distract him, and the boy remained standing in place, without asking her the question he so wanted to ask. There was no time to waste, and his feet carried him away from this place so that Barbie's efforts would not be in vain. Barbara's gaze fell on Mr. Brandon's body, which was becoming covered in fur again. Looks like the guy has mutated again. Her heart was pounding wildly. The girl began to shake Brandon to make sure he was okay. She had to help him and hide him. Suddenly, Barbara heard her mother's voice, calling them, because Mrs. Rosie wanted to see her and Brandon. The door opened, and Mrs. Bella and her guests entered the room. The woman froze in surprise. The room was empty, although she asked the guys to wait for her here. All that was visible to Mrs. Bella and her guests was a wide-open window. Barbara was very pleased that the garage was located right in the garden behind her house, so she could return at any time. She didn't even have time to change her clothes. It was all too wolfish. It's good that at least the girl's apartment was completely private. Very carefully, Brandon asked the lady if she had already guessed. Barbara immediately understood what he meant. Before, she had thought that she had simply made a mistake. After all, it would be strange to recognize a child who had been lost 10 years ago from a poster. Now her doubts were confirmed. Brandon couldn't believe that the girl now knew everything, but still helped him. Barbara didn't understand the essence of his question, because if you can't help yourself, then who can you help? Now the couple knew everything about each other. Then her family did a favor to Brandon's family, so it will be easier for them to cooperate. The girl said with absolute sincerity that for her, of course, Mr. Brandon was more important, and she still wanted to ask him to pretend to be her boyfriend. So the guy shouldn't have pissed her off, but he suddenly wondered what would happen if he did it anyway. The girl realized that this guy was still selfish, and she began to search for words in her head to explain everything to him. Taking him by the hand and sitting him down on the sofa, Barbara said that if he took up the family business, he would be busy and would not be able to devote much time to her. This will make her angry, because the girl has already become dependent on Brandon's fluffy ears. The guy began to ask her not to cling to him like that, but he couldn't put much pressure on her. For some reason, he was thinking about the fact that Barbara no longer liked him in his wolf form. The girl was happy. Finally, he was in wolf form again, and she could hug him. Deep down, she knew that Master Brandon didn't need to know that she was more attracted to him when he was in his wolf form. Barbara didn't know if it was okay for her to get so close to him, but after all, the money had already been paid. Still, she thought about the fact that this guy turned out to be from a very wealthy family and clearly did not need money, especially after the recent circumstances. The girl decided to ask why Mr. Brandon didn't want to come home. He didn't look like a man who didn't want to run the family business. The guy sighed heavily and asked not to focus on it. His family abandoned him when he was just a child, and now they are looking for him just to get rid of the burden, so Brandon did not feel guilty. Barbara couldn't believe her ears. How could parents abandon their own child? Suddenly, her head began to hurt badly, and memories came back to her. The boy tells her that his family abandoned him, so he cannot return. His father had problems in business, and he could not repay with help. Barbara simply couldn't believe that this moment actually happened in her life. Brandon asked her to simply ignore it, and the girl responded that she didn't want to remember anything. The guy didn't understand what she was talking about. Barbara had been surprising him a lot lately. The girl joked that she was just tired, but if memories arise more than once, then it is unlikely to be a coincidence. Brandon apologized to her, believing that it was all because of his mutation and that he was always causing problems for Barbara. In turn, the girl tried to cheer him up, because that's what friends are for. Who if not her? She immediately changed the subject, asking to squeeze this fluffy and cute creature some more. Brandon grabbed her hand sharply, reminding her that even though he looked like an animal, he was still human. Barbara agreed with him, although it was difficult for her to keep it in her head all the time. She whispered softly that his tail was so cute that she just couldn't resist. After these words, Brandon gave in and allowed Barbara to squeeze him, although the whole process embarrassed him a little. At the end, he added that this was his gratitude to her for today. Without thinking twice, the girl began to touch this plush creature with great joy. She had plans to have a barbecue today and asked Brandon if he would like to cook for them himself. Gently touching her head with his nose, he said that he would cook everything himself. He thought it was time to admit to himself that he liked this girl madly. Like a drop in an unrequited lake, after meeting his parents, the boy's life returned to normal. Brandon also continued to work as a hostess, and Barbara worked hard at her company, increasing advertising, which created a sensation. It seemed like the boy's family was no longer obsessed with his disappearance, as if nothing had happened. Everything would have been really like this. If not for one evening, Rosie came to chance to find out if Mr. Brandon had any free time. Out of nowhere, the gentleman himself appeared, dismissing the hostess. When she came face to face with her son, the woman's mouth fell open in surprise, and there was an awkward pause between them. Brandon was the first to start the conversation, asking his mother how she found him, to which the woman replied that if you look long enough, you will definitely find him. She wanted to ask her son why he disappeared 10 years ago, but the guy stopped her. He didn't intend to talk about it in this place, since there were plenty of prying ears everywhere. Grabbing his mother's hand, Brandon led her into a private room, shouting to his colleague that they would be using the room at his expense. A rumor was born out of nowhere. This hostess thought that the woman was old enough to be Brandon's mother. Is he really like that? It was at this moment that Barbara came to the establishment. She came specifically to the gentleman. The girl was told that their hostess had just left with a guest, so she had to wait a little, which surprised her very much, since Brandon had free time today. The guy's not-so-nice colleague had an idea to take advantage of the situation, and Brandon himself left his rich client and retired to a private room with an older lady. Approaching Barbara, the hostess offered to brighten her wait with his presence, completely free of charge, but the girl had absolutely zero interest in him. She was going to focus on her work, but the guy wasn't going to let such a big fish go. He immediately pretended that he didn't want to offend her in any way, saying that she was much more elegant and beautiful than that old lady who was now with Brandon. Barbara became thoughtful when she heard about the old lady, which inspired the guy even more. The girl listened to the hostess with detachment, although she herself was immersed in her thoughts about Brandon and the elderly woman. At the end of his monologue, the guy said that he could appreciate Mrs. Barbara much more, and he was immensely pleased to communicate with her. Although he did not say that Brandon treated her worse than the other guests, but the meaning was the same. After listening to him, the girl asked him to bring her some champagne. The hostess was glad that everything was going according to plan, since she ordered a whole bottle. Barbara found this guy incredibly annoying, but tried not to show it, looking at her phone, where she received a text message from Brandon that he was a little busy and asked her to wait. The girl was very interested in what he could do in a private room with a woman older than him. That annoying hostess showed up again, and the guy brought a bottle of champagne. With a smile on her face, Barbara asked him to keep the bottle of champagne for himself, to sit down from her, and not to disturb her anymore. The guy was very unhappy, but he couldn't do anything about it. In front of him was simply a murderous woman. Still, he had to leave. The clock at that moment showed 20 hours and 50 minutes. At 9 o'clock in the evening, Barbara drank her first glass of wine. At 9 o'clock and 10 minutes, she resumed her work. The girl was starting to get angry that the gentleman was still busy. At 10 o'clock in the evening, she wrote to him, asking if he was still busy. It was already 11 in the evening. The answer never came. Barbara didn't know what to do, write to him again or go home. She really wanted to sleep. The only thing that bothered her was that Mr. Brandon asked her to wait. Here the girl caught herself thinking why she was so obedient. It was obvious that the guy didn't have time, so why didn't he reschedule the meeting for the next day? Barbara decided to try her luck and go into the private room to tell Mr. Brandon that she was going home. Near the door, she saw a guy with his crying mother, whom he was sending home. The girl couldn't believe her eyes. It was Aunt Rosie, but what was she doing here? Barbara was faced with a dilemma about whether she should greet the woman and whether she should do so at all in a place like this. As a result, she decided to pretend that she hadn't noticed anything. Brandon quietly left the private room. The guy looked at her with such a pitiful look. Barbara did not understand what had just happened in the private room, that he was in such a state. Suddenly, Brandon came up and hugged the girl tightly. He blamed himself for even allowing the thought that he was a killer. With a trembling voice, he began to thank her. At this moment, Barbara was completely perplexed, not even imagining why she was being thanked so much. She decided to say that she noticed Brandon leaving the private room with Aunt Rosie. The guy realized his mistake. He was now hugging Barbara in a place full of people, and all eyes were directed straight at them. She took his head, trying to bring him to his senses, to calm him down. Barbara has already told him more than once that no matter what, she is with him. At the vending machine, the girl took Brandon's favorite milk. He was a little confused that the girl knew about his preferences. Usually people thought that hostesses preferred alcohol. It was obvious to her, since Barbara had seen the guy buy it on multiple occasions. After these words, Barbara caught herself thinking that if she could determine Mr. Brandon's preferences, then why couldn't she do it in her past relationships? Her ex-boyfriend had said more than once that he didn't like liver, but the girl still ordered it for him at the restaurant. Barbara, for some reason, became very embarrassed, but replied that there was nothing surprising about that. Gently taking Brandon by the chin, she said that he had acted out of character today, and if he behaved like this at work, would it affect the other clients? Tears welled up in the boy's eyes. Barbara was a little confused by this, because she didn't often meet men who cried in front of her, but it turned out that Brandon was happy at that moment, because he knew that whether his parents abandoned him or not, Mrs. Barbara would be with him. Thanks to this, he was able to calmly talk to his mother and find out some misunderstandings. The girl asked what misunderstandings they were talking about, and whether this meant that Aunt Rosie had not abandoned him. Brandon nodded briefly, and Barbara was pleased with this information. After downing her fizzy drink, the girl said that Aunt Rosie didn't look like the type of person who would sell her son. Otherwise, the situation was like something out of a TV series about a rich family. The guy asked if his statements embarrassed her, since it was clear that he had run away himself. The girl replied with a smile that it didn't bother her at all. Mr. Brandon wanted to say so, and that's what he said. Since the guy is not in the best position right now, Barbara advised him not to go back and not to force himself to do it. She knew it was a carefully considered decision on his part, and her job was to support the guy no matter what. Help us get through this together. In the end, the girl added that her words did not matter if Mr. Brandon did not want to reunite with his family, but he could return there at any time. Without answering, the guy just hugged Barbara. Then he asked her not to do this, because she would spoil him, but the girl did not understand at all what he was talking about. In return, she hugged him too, and promised that before he found her boring, it would be better to leave everything as it was. Pulling away abruptly, Brandon said excitedly that Mistress Barbara was not boring at all. Nervously squeezing her shoulders, the guy wanted to say something that he had no right to say now. Right now, Barbara was ready to hear anything, so she was ready for anything. Brandon's teeth clenched in pain again. a voice inside him telling him not to act impulsively. How could she, such a worthless person who had betrayed her, admit it so fearlessly? Barbara thought that the gentleman was mutating again, but she had already gotten used to his sudden transformations. His breathing became very heavy. He began to think what would happen if he told the girl everything, if she still found out the truth. Barbara hugged Brandon tenderly and asked him not to strain himself. Smoke appeared out of nowhere. The girl was scared because this was the first time. Instead of Mr. Brandon, Barbara was being hugged from behind by a boy of about 10 years old. The girl froze in fear and surprise, not understanding why there were now two of them. Turning nervously, she asked Mr. Brandon if she was imagining that there was a child sitting behind her, hugging her. The two men looked so much alike that Barbara wondered if this was what the gentleman had looked like as a child. A few seconds later, the boy rushed away, and the girl began to scream that he was running away. She was going to catch up with him, still not understanding how this was even possible. Brandon just stood there rooted to the spot, trying to understand why this happened, because there was no such mutation before. During this transformation, his child form was used, and he could not synchronize his thinking with it. Barbara had been physically well developed since childhood. She stopped the boy and promised that they would not hurt him. The child screamed that Barbie had abandoned him, that she didn't like him anymore, and that she wouldn't love him anymore. Barbara stood there in complete bewilderment. Only Brandon understood what was being discussed. The girl thought that this child was a clone of the master and was now voicing his thoughts. Shaking his head, the boy asked for forgiveness, blaming himself for being too scared. Brandon came up behind her and hit her with the baby, causing him to fall on Barbara. With absolute calm on his face, the guy said that he did it because he couldn't control it. Then, with the same calm, he called Barbara home. The girl didn't know what to do in this situation, but she knew one thing: Brandon didn't do the right thing. Having stopped and caught his breath a little, the boy began to blame himself for running away so calmly and for leaving Barbie in danger and simply running away. He suddenly realized that it would be very bad for the subject to escape, and the girl would definitely be severely punished. Brandon decided to go back for her and take her away, because he was the one who felt weak before. There was definitely a way to protect Barbie. He always knew that. Always. When Brandon returned, he saw the girl's father twisting her arms and throwing her to the ground, furiously asking if it was her. Opening his eyes, the boy first thought that it was Barbara standing in front of him, waiting for him to wake up. She asked him cautiously if he was in any pain. Quietly getting up from the bed, he replied that nothing hurt. For a moment, the boy froze. Barbara began to carefully ask if she understood correctly that his name was Brandon. The child began to repeat that Barbie hated him, that she would forget about him. Then his gaze switched to the girl, and he asked why she was so kind to him. She didn't quite understand what he wanted to tell her, but she knew that he had a lot of things to do. So Barbara asked him to calm down and tell everything in order from the very beginning. Just as the boy was about to say something, the door suddenly swung open and Brandon walked in. Looking at the boy, who had already woken up, the guy said that dinner was ready. The three of them sat and ate dinner, Barbara fully aware of the oppressive atmosphere that reigned at the table. Mr. Brandon kept his eyes on himself, and the girl thought that this made a big impression on the little one. Still, Barbara thought he was so cute, and how similar she and this boy were. She began to blame herself for thinking about it again. Lately, the girl caught herself thinking that it wasn't very good that a boy had such an influence on a guy. Sometimes Barbara imagined that one day Mr. Brandon would have a girlfriend. He will introduce her as his love, so he will not be able to communicate with the miss anymore and will terminate their contract. After Barbara pictured it in her head, her heart skipped a beat. The girl was very surprised when something strange happened at the table. Little Brandon and Big Brandon put a roll on her plate at the same time. The guy looked angrily at the boy and asked why he even thought that Barbara liked it. She didn't like meat at all. The child replied that meat was delicious and it was her favorite food. The girl felt very awkward that the guys were behaving like that. She tried to smooth over the situation and asked them not to fight about it. Barbara asked Mr. Brandon to be gentle with the boy. He wanted to answer that it was a rare mutation, and tomorrow it could disappear. But he remained silent. He hoped that what happened before with the appearance of the girl was happening. The mutation would soon end. The boy carefully took the girl by the hand. Looking at her with his huge eyes, he said that he was real, asking where he could go. At that moment, Barbara felt so ashamed. She asked him for forgiveness, hugged him tenderly, and said that they were glad he was here. because this mutation had the mindset of a child, and she should have watched her words. Since that was the case, the girl allowed the boy to sleep with her today, and hearing this, Brandon became very wary. It was almost midnight. The child came into the room and said that he wanted to sleep, so he called Barbara with him. The girl had just finished work, so she happily agreed to go and lie down in bed. She went to the bathroom to wash herself when the door suddenly slammed and Brandon closed it with a bang. Barbara turned around and asked what was happening to him. The guy came to say that he would also be sleeping with them today. The girl was not going to do this, saying that there was a guest room in the apartment and it would be better for him to sleep there. Looking at the boy for a second, Brandon asked if this child would also sleep alone in that case. A verbal altercation began between them. The boy shouted that he knew that the guy didn't like him, but it just so happened that he wasn't thrilled with him either. Barbara began to separate them again, explaining that they were one and the same Mr. Brandon. But the child seemed to know something that his adult copy did not want to tell the girl. The child started screaming that he ran away because he was scared, but he is an adult after so many years and continues to do it again. The boy was very nervous and on edge at the same time. He asked Brandon if he had apologized to Barbara. The girl couldn't understand what was going on and what kind of forgiveness they were talking about. The guy hadn't been himself lately, especially after meeting his mother. Brandon wasn't going to let Barbara know about it, so he couldn't leave them alone either. Grabbing the boy, he ordered him to go with him, even though the child was struggling and screaming to be let go. Barbara decided to take matters into her own hands again, so she grabbed the two guys and dragged them along with her. She decided that in this case, they would sleep together. It's a good thing she had a big bed. In the dream, the boy pressed himself against the girl and hugged her hand. Brandon also clung to her and tried to calm down, because as Barbara said, he would disappear from the past tomorrow, and there would be nothing to worry about. The guy was very ashamed that he deceived the girl. Everything he said about the misunderstanding on the bench was true. Brandon's mother knew nothing, but his father actually decided to sell his son, but later regretted it greatly. Mrs. Rosie admitted that she was too stupid. She searched for her son for 2 years and eventually found him in this place. The father raised a terrible scandal, but at the same time, he had long regretted what he had done. As soon as the woman found out the exact address, she immediately arrived, but her son had already disappeared. They didn't give up for so many years and looked for him. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just wanted Brandon to be okay. But Rosie promised that they could make it up to him if he wanted to come back. All the guy asked her was how things were going at the research institute. When the family came there for their son, there was no one there. Brandon's father had signed a contract that he shouldn't have signed, so they could only rely on their own strength. Since the family had not seen their son for a long time, the woman noticed how much he had matured. Mrs. Rosie knew that the boy had a very hard time working in a place like this, if it weren't for Barbara. As soon as the woman reached out to hug her son, she was immediately slapped by Brandon's hand. At that very moment, she apologized, saying that she only wanted the best. Mrs. Rosie's face sank. She supposed that her son would not have left home then, and Miss Barbara would agree with her now. Brandon wondered if Barbara would really agree with his mother. The irony of fate is that this thought would never have occurred to the guy on its own. People's excuses and justifications were funny, but there was nothing shameful in these words. Brandon was still a long way from Barbara, and it really irritated him that he couldn't confess to her. Very carefully, the guy kissed the girl on the neck. If the past him tells her everything, will Brandon be able to justify himself? Will she be able to forgive him? There were too many thoughts in his head. He wanted to cool down alone. Kissing her lips tenderly, Brandon asked Barbara to wait just a little longer. A few more steps and he will catch up with her. The moment little Brandon began to fidget, the boy realized he couldn't help himself. He felt so ashamed of what he had just done. The only thing that calmed him down was that the girl was sleeping. The guy carefully covered her with a blanket and whispered for her to forgive him. Barbara opened her eyes slightly, trying to understand what had just happened. It turned out that all this time she could not fall asleep, and now, after what Mr. Brandon did, sleep was completely gone. She tried to understand why the gentleman had just kissed her. Besides, today I asked her for forgiveness. Did she really give herself away? And besides, there was also a child in the bed with them. Barbara couldn't believe the thoughts in her head that Mr. Brandon loved her too. The next morning, the guy wondered why he suddenly disappeared from the past. Coming out of the shower, Barbara called the guys to breakfast. Just as Mr. Brandon had prepared dumplings, She also suggested that they go have some fun, since today was a day off. After the boy heard about the entertainment, his eyes lit up. This morning, Barbara was very excited to realize that Mr. Brandon liked her too. One could say that she loved him. The girl had never encountered such feelings before. The girl believed that while the baby was here, it wouldn't be a sin to go somewhere and have some fun. Barbara was going to kill two birds with one stone, deal with Mr. Mom, and get away. Here they are. The girl was last at an amusement park when she was a child. Now she felt a great sense of nostalgia. The boy looked very distracted. Barbara asked if he didn't like the idea. Brandon said he was at an amusement park when he was little. Still, something was bothering the girl, and she suggested going somewhere else. The boy had no intention of leaving here, after all. It had to happen. Suddenly, the mutation would pass, and the child would disappear. But Barbara didn't like it when he talked about himself like that. The smiling cashier gave Brandon the tickets. She was very touched that such a young dad came with his cute son. The guy decided that he needed to lift his spirits, and at the same time, accept his past. He thought the little one would disappear anyway once he got into trouble. But the boy seemed happy, so Brandon decided to just find the right moment. The kid volunteered to go on the Ferris wheel with Barbara. She happily agreed, but asked why there. Did he really like the heights so much? The kid just heard a legend about the Ferris wheel, that if two people reach the top of the wheel together, they will never be separated again. Suddenly, Brandon came up to her, grabbed the girl by the hand, and asked her not to listen to him. Since the child did not understand anything, the guy suddenly dragged Barbara somewhere. She only managed to take the boy by the hand, thinking that she shouldn't have paid so much attention to the child. It all looked strange, very strange. The behavior of Mr. Brandon and the boy, in every way, showed that they liked the girl. Barbara's heart told her that she really liked this guy too. The girl and the boy were having fun as best they could. She knew little about love. She could only guess about mental anguish. Like the hero of a novel, she had no such experience. However, when she was with Mr. Brandon, it wasn't like a blind date. Barbara felt at peace, guessing it was because they had been friends for a long time. Then the girl realized that she had never met Mr. Brandon before, so they had only been friends for a short time. Something didn't add up in her head, so she decided to clear it up. Brandon went to order cotton candy. Barbara hoped that he would be a little late so that she could talk to the boy alone. He immediately understood that she wanted to talk to him, so he told her to say what she wanted to say, and he would answer everything. The child noticed that when Barbara wanted to ask something, she made a very thoughtful face, and he himself thought too much. Since that was the case, she decided to ask directly how long they had known Mr. Brandon. They were not recent friends, which the boy confirmed. In the future, he liked this girl more and more. He wanted to make an impression on her, but at the same time he was shy. Still, the boy wanted to tell her, or rather ask her, whether Barbara would be angry with him. The girl realized that Brandon from the past told her that in the future he would like her more and more. Barbara promised him that she would not be angry, and he could calmly tell her everything. He was very happy, remembering how they used to make promises to each other on their little fingers. Suddenly, little Brandon's mood changed. He became very sad and said that everything would be fine if he corrected his mistake and didn't leave her girlfriend. The father slammed Barbie's head into the ground, demanding to know where she had taken the test subject. The girl said with all her might that she had no idea who her father was talking about. The man pressed her head into the ground very hard and shouted that how could she not know if she herself helped him escape, and now they have no one to conduct research on. The girl tried her best to explain that she didn't understand who her dad was talking about. The man hit her in the face, threatening that he would not even look at the fact that she was his daughter. This man blamed the girl for not even imagining how much this item was worth, and that thanks to it, the whole world would change. Grabbing Barbie by the hair, he slammed her face into the ground again, thus trying to make the girl realize that without this specimen, the goal would not be achieved. Brandon saw his friend in pain, and he could have saved her. The boy was afraid that it would happen again if he ran away again. But no, the girl was sent to college because of helping him. Brandon kept thinking that if he had gone back then, Barbie would have been punished again. The girl was not going to tell anything, even despite all the pain caused to her. She only said that she was just playing. In the distance, she saw Brandon return, not understanding why he did it. Barbie was in incredible pain, but she didn't want all this pain and her efforts to go to waste. She almost silently whispered for her friend to run away. The boy turned around and started running, even though his gut feeling told him he was making a mistake and had to save Barbie. When Mr. Brandon returned, Barbara was muttering something under her breath. He asked if she was unwell, should he call the doctor? The girl said that it was not necessary, lying that her sugar level had risen because they had eaten a lot of sweets. Barbara immediately changed the subject, but still thought about her memories. She couldn't see the face of the man who beat her, but she remembered little Brandon. The girl brought the boy a hamburger with a small crown on it, and he was very surprised by her reaction, that she was not angry with him. In the past, when Barbara was a teenager, she was supposedly in a car accident and couldn't really remember anything before it. Even her mother refused to tell. Apparently there was no need. The girl handed a piece of cotton candy to Mr. Brandon, offering him a taste. However, after this accident, the girl's parents divorced. The mother said that her father was not worthy of being called her father, but maybe these were memories of that same alleged accident. Brandon gently took Barbara's hand and placed a piece of the cotton candy into his mouth. After that, he licked her hand, which made the girl very embarrassed. Even more, this situation shocked her. She could not stop the frantic beating of her own heart, but should she have stopped it? Their day passed so quickly, with a crowd gathering to ride the Ferris wheel. Barbara said that all that was left for them to do was ride the Ferris wheel. The boy happily agreed. He had had so much fun today that he had even forgotten about the wheel. Barbara turned to the child and asked why he didn't come again sometime. The child didn't expect such a question. The girl looked at Brandon for approval. After all, this was his mutation. Smiling slightly, he replied that if the boy wanted to come here again, he would agree. At this point, Barbara felt awkward. She thought that if Mr. Brandon liked her, then maybe she should tell him about her feelings, or wait a little longer. She assumed that the reason for his behavior lay in that fateful day. The boy was incredibly inspired to find himself at such a height. From this angle, the city really was visible, as if in the palm of your hand. Turning to Mr. Brandon, Barbara asked why he was silent. The guy replied that everything seemed so unreal and too beautiful to him. The girl didn't quite understand if everything was okay with him, but Brandon replied that everything was great. He admitted that he had never felt so good, as if something was about to happen in the next second, as if this was all a dream. Previously, Brandon had no right to stand next to Barbara. His conscience ate him from the inside. His heart was squeezed with pain, and the girl's bloody face, beaten by her own father, was constantly before his eyes. He felt a panic like nothing else. In other words, Brandon ran away not because Barbie saved him, but because he was a coward. Then he wanted to quietly return to her, to have a normal conversation, but he was driven by fear. The boy thought that if they noticed him, they would get even angrier, and in his head, he begged Barbie to forgive him. He missed her very much, and every day he thought about how much the girl had suffered because of him. When Brandon finally came back, he saw that the institute was no longer there, and the building was up for sale. It was at that moment that he realized he had lost Barbie. Every day, the boy choked with regret and despair. Then Brandon realized what a son she was to him, and then he felt how big a hole was gaping in his chest. Suddenly, the light in the cabin went out, and the wheel also stopped moving. The boy got scared and pressed himself very tightly against Barbara. The girl assumed that the Ferris wheel had broken down. She had recently seen something like this on the news, but she never thought that this would happen to them. The booth wobbled so hard that Barbara and the boy fell to the floor, but Brandon cushioned the impact by taking it on himself. The girl asked to be careful, as the wheel could break completely, because due to the uneven distribution of weight, they were constantly wobbling. The boy suggested that he should expect more problems, but Barbara asked him not to say that, as the boy was on the verge of crying from fear. She agreed that the situation was not the most pleasant. It was unknown what else could go wrong, but there was no need to make assumptions. When the booth shook again, the boy hugged Barbara even tighter and cried. He didn't want to die, because he finally met Barbie. The girl asked him not to say that, convincing him that they would not die, but would definitely be saved. The latest news said that the helicopter would take too long to get there, at least a couple of hours. Only a fire truck arrived. The boy screamed that he didn't want Barbie to die, promising that he wouldn't run away a second time. The girl asked him not to even think about it. A night fireworks display was launched into the sky. The boy kissed Barbara on the cheek, and at that moment, she seemed to understand why the childhood event had affected her. The child was completely different from that weak and timid Brandon, absolutely nothing in common, He showed his fortitude and at the same time confessed his feelings. Suddenly, the mutation occurred at that very moment. At parting, the boy said that despite who he is now, he will not become himself from the future. But when he grows up, perhaps he will meet his Barbie. In any case, he promised to save her. Even if they fell, he from the past would never be the same. This boy had changed. Now he had a purpose.